right. All right, everybody. I just wanted to take a moment here and introduce you to Ryan Wegman. He is with Sherry's Wine and Spirits, and he'll give you a little bit more information about himself. But he is going to talk to us tonight about the top alcohol brands. Go ahead, Ryan.
So thank you, Pat. Thank you, National Concierge Association, for having me. I think this is my third year hosting a teleconference with everyone, a webinar, and I really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun to present all of the knowledge I've gained over the last 11 years that I've been working in this business. Just as some background, I do apologize. My name does not appear on the presentation, but again, my name is Ryan Wegman. You can just look me up online if you're interested in knowing a little bit more about my background and where I'm coming from that may help inform you as far as what questions you'd like to ask at the end of the presentation. We are going to take a look at a lot of the information that I've been gaining over the last 5 years or so. There's been a pretty dynamic shift in how people are consuming alcohol, especially now that the millennial category, which you hear about in multiple markets, has really taken financial charge in a big way, although they're not the biggest spenders you're going to see. And what I've done is for the brands that we're going to understand, it's really, as I was putting the presentation together, I realized more than anything, you need to understand who your client is. So when they come to you at the desk and they look you in the eye and they ask you for a recommendation, you can at least kind of generally, if you're able to understand and estimate their age by their appearance, there is something that you can gain from understanding this webinar to what you should probably recommend based on the category from whence they're coming. Now, granted that it will always shift. It's likely, you may have the 22-year-old tech billionaire that's asking for a recommendation, or you could have someone who is a miserly billionaire in their 50s. I mean, everything is possible. We're looking at the general trends, however, not the exceptions to the rule tonight. And so you'll bear with me. I think it's a really fascinating set of data that we get to examine when you see generally that people are spending in ways that we never really expected. And you can see in front of you on the screen, there are a number of brands that most people probably don't recognize or have never seen before and are seeing for the first time. The reason I wanted to put this slide up for you is because so many of these are those brands that are now driving the market. So, for example, Cherry Hearing Liqueur. Now, that's something that only appeared, I think it was something like 60 or 70 years ago. It has an official royal seal from the Queen of England and was used many, this was, I think, before Queen Elizabeth II, maybe as far back as Victoria. And it was used commonly in a lot of cocktails and then fell out of fashion as things were more and more flavored or mixed ahead of time, and has since come back into fashion. And this is generally a trend we've seen with everything that you see in that picture, including a 15-year dry stack sherry, second from the left on the far left. So things like that would have been unthinkable 15 years ago, to have something that was so old and so traditional, particularly like a category like sherry. And interestingly, sherry, as we'll see, is not being driven, like a lot of things, by an older generation. It's by the younger generation. Conversely, it's the older generation that's paying the bills on a lot of these accounts for restaurants, etc., where a lot of the bulk of the business is coming from. So why don't we go ahead and start with the first slide. And there we go. So here you go. So here, so we're all on the same page, these are the demographic breakdowns and age groups that you'll see as pictured for the people that you'll encounter on a daily basis. It's unlikely that you'll ever have someone under the age of 21. You hopefully won't have anyone under the age of 21 asking for recommendations. But millennials, Generation X, and the boomers, these are the three main categories that you can break people in as you give them recommendations. And people look at the millennials category and say, well, if someone who's 36 years old, are they really a millennial? There's a lot of debate back and forth, but data and by the Nielsen data that we're going to look at, as well as IRI, one of the other polling and research firms, they did find that millennials tend to, when they're consuming alcohol, trend with other millennials. The 36-year-olds trend with millennials. So I think as far as the debates are concerned between the generations, each of these categories are pretty solid as far as how they tend to skew. It's in the boomers that you see some exceptions in the early to mid-50s, but once you start approaching retirement age, everything tends to skew the exact same way. So for the most part, these are heavily reliable categories as far as how people are consuming alcohol. One other exception to that, I would say, would be in millennials, the very early millennials, anywhere between 21 to 24, 10 or 23, they tend to shop a little bit differently, but around 22, 23, they start spending much more. But anyway, so here, just take a mental note, but I think these are pretty generally universally understood categories for age groups. Next slide, please, Pat. So the first thing that we need to know about our first category, millennials are driving consumption and change. So a lot of the market that has come up in the last, let's say, 5 years, especially the last 3 years, a lot of the heavier amounts and larger amounts of product are being purchased by millennials. Millennials are exactly 25% of the population, or right around there, but they're consuming 35% of U.S. beverages. So to put that into perspective, they per capita drink a lot. And this is very similar to another age group that we'll see shortly, but it seems to be like they're doing a large portion of the heavy lifting